Thank you, everyone. My name's Luke Thorburn. I'm a PhD student at King's College London. And today I'm going to be talking about a very specific data analysis method that we've developed, which I think could be useful in many of the contexts in which you're working. So this is joint work with Andrew Konya at Remesh, and it's part of an ongoing project in collaboration with AllMap in the Middle East. So to motivate this, I want to start off by pointing to a sort of ancient trade-off in trying to find common ground between people. It's much easier to get people to agree on sort of vague platitudes or general notions of goodwill than it is on specific things that they want to happen in the future. Many of you will have encountered this trade-off in your work. So there's this sort of fundamental trade-off between bridgingness or common groundness and concreteness. But when we're trying to sort of create agreements, so you can think of creating a peace agreement or deciding on a specific policy that determines how people are going to act in the future or commit to acting in the future. What we really want is stuff that's both bridging and concrete. So the sort of small minority of stuff that's not on this common trade-off that is in the sort of upper right quadrant of this plot. At the moment, we have ways of quantifying bridgingness or common ground. There's lots of different ways of doing that, but you can think of just sort of taking the minimum proportion of people who agree with a specific policy across the different groups involved. But we don't, at the moment, have ways of quantifying concreteness in a way that would allow us to systematically explore policies that are in the upper right-hand quadrant of this plot. So what I'm going to describe today is a method for quantifying concreteness that could then feed into a bunch of these different processes. The basic idea is that we have a bunch of policy statements which are candidate things that might go into an agreement, and we're going to evaluate those with respect to a set of possible future worlds or scenarios which are sort of representative of the situations which we expect to find ourselves in, needing to implement these policies and make decisions in the future about whether people are adhering to the policies. So you can think of a policy statement might be something like, I want a better future for my children. That's a fairly non-concrete policy statement, but it's a policy statement. And then in the context of Israel-Palestine, a specific scenario would be a specific proposal about the status of Jerusalem in a peace agreement. And so we're going to adjudicate whether those policies are consistent with those scenarios. And importantly, we're not just going to have one person do that, but we're going to have a diverse set of raters who are representative of the stakeholders in that particular context, all make these judgments, consistency judgments. And then the degree to which a policy is concrete is basically the degree to which those raters agree about whether a given scenario in the future is consistent with the given policy. So it's a form of inter-rater agreement. So just to go back to that example again, if the policy is, I want a better future for my children, everyone might agree with that in the abstract, but when you ask them to actually decide, is that policy consistent with a particular future, a particular status of Jerusalem in the future, people on both sides of the conflict are going to disagree about whether that policy and that scenario are consistent. Whereas something like both Israelis and Palestinians should be able to freely access Jerusalem, that's a much more concrete statement, and people can sort of adjudicate whether that's true under a particular future world, regardless of whether they agree that that policy is normatively a good thing. And then in general, we do this across not just one scenario, but many different possible scenarios, which are sort of representative of the kinds of worlds or decisions that we expect to encounter. So finally, I'm just going to show you some actual examples, not for Israel-Palestine, but for a perhaps slightly less charged context, which is decisions about free speech policies on campuses and university campuses. So to just map these to our diagram, as the set of policy statements, I'm going to, well, the analysis has a set of statements like this. There's many more than this, but these were sort of elicited from people using Remesh, just general members of the public, about what they thought what policies they think should be implemented on university campuses in the US. So there's a sort of a range of policies here. Some are more or less concrete than others. I'll go to the next. That's all right. So then the set of scenarios that I'm going to use are taken from a database compiled by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, who compile sort of campus free speech incidents. And these are very sort of high-level descriptions. The actual descriptions of what was said in these incidents are much more concrete about and using the sort of verbatim language, but you get the general idea. A lot of it's pretty unpleasant, but these are the kinds of situations in which people actually need to decide, does this contravene our campus free speech, university free speech policy or not? And then as the set of raters, we are working on using human raters for this as sort of the gold standard of concreteness evaluation, but for this example, I just prompted a language model to pretend it was a sort of diverse set of people in the US. There's much more complicated or sophisticated ways of doing this, but you'll see that even just this sort of fairly rudimentary prompting seems to work to a first approximation. So once you do that, do you mind zooming in? That's fine, yeah. So these are the policies that rise to the top of the list in terms of concreteness. You'll see, so at the top, no weapons are allowed during protests. Maybe that's not related to speech, but it's a very concrete thing that you can evaluate whether it's consistent or not with different scenarios. You can read through this list and judge for yourself. I'll flag that this method, it's very dependent on who your raters are and what the scenarios are that you're evaluating against. So most of the scenarios in the FIRE database don't relate to students, they relate to professors or staff saying things. And for that reason, I think the policies that specifically mentioned what students should do or what students can or can't say, I think the concreteness scores for those policies are less accurate than for the staff. So you'll see some of that in that maybe the last item on this list, which is still fairly concrete, students should be allowed to express themselves verbally. In the calculation that we do, we correct for whether a policy is relevant to the scenario, and we have a way of measuring that. So I suspect what happened here is that most of the scenarios were about staff, and that policy is particularly about students. So the concreteness score is less reliable, and we need a more representative set of scenarios. I'll just show you the bottom of the list as well. So these are the things that were sort of maximally not concrete. Things like everyone should be able to speak freely. People are going to disagree about what speaking freely means. People can say anything non-threatening. People are going to disagree about what constitutes a threat. You can say whatever you want, so long as it doesn't endanger others. People are going to disagree about what endangering others means. So it seems pretty good at distinguishing concreteness in a sort of intuitive sense. I will leave it there. I would love to hear about how you navigate this trade-off in your work. If you have different ways of thinking about it or strategies for dealing with it, that would be of great interest to me. Thank you to my collaborators on this work. And yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Luke.